Okay, Bio30. So we're gonna finish up our nervous system discussion here with some sensory uh, organ systems other than the eye and the ear. So let's start with skin. So you have tons of different types of receptors in your skin. I mentioned this in a video or two prior. You've got pressure sensors, which detect the movement of skin and changes in the body surface, right? Like, am I touching something? How hard am I touching it? Is it soft? Is it hard? You've got temperature sensors, which detect changes in the external temperatures. You can tolerate a very wide range of temperatures, but not rapid temperature changes. So you'll notice that if you're in the shower, um, and if I were to, well, let's say I would turn the hot water on super hot before you got in the shower, and then I pushed you in, or then you got in and you didn't expect it to be so hot. You jump right out, it'd be super hot. But let's say I got you in the shower and then we gradually turned the water from warm to hotter to hot, like the hottest possible setting. Um, Now it would still be hot. You would still know it's hot, but you'd probably be able to um, handle that heat a little bit better. So temperature sensors in the skin are interesting. That's not to say that if I put you inside of like a burning bucket that you would not feel it if it was gradual. Like you would most certainly feel it. I'm just saying that temperature sensors have gradual um, uh, sort of tolerance as the heat increases or decreases. Touch receptors exist at different depths, and this is really cool. So there's certain touch receptors at the surface of, like subsurface of your skin, and there's other touch receptors far deeper inside of your skin. And if you think about it, it makes sense. Why? If I were to push down on something, a gentle push will only trigger the sensory receptors that are close to the surface. If I push on something really hard or grip it really tightly, it's going to trigger the sensory touch receptors that are further down beneath the epidermis and the dermis. So the depth of these touch receptors is important. Um, we've got heat receptors, light touch receptors, like I said, hard touch receptors. I'll move my face over here. You'll see it down here, further down. Uh, you've got cold temperature receptors, pain receptors. Look at this. You've also got receptors that are attached to the roots of your hairs. This is why when somebody touches ever so gently, like the hairs on your arm, you feel it still, right? It's not touching your skin, but it's touching the hair, and you feel the hair moving because there's touch sensors in and around your roots of your hair, which is super neat. This one's kind of cool. Uh, do you know that you're wearing clothes right now? I mean, assuming that you are. Sensory adaptation occurs when the receptor becomes accustomed to the stimulus. So when you first put a shirt on in the morning, you feel it. And then very quickly, you stop feeling it. I'm not very aware right now that my hoodie is like rubbing on my arms and rubbing against my shoulders. It's there. It's been doing that this whole time, but I don't think about it. And so sensory adaptation occurs when you become accustomed to a stimulus. So the neurons stop firing even though the stimulus is still present, which makes sense. Um, when you are around something that smells really bad, that smell really doesn't stick around very long because not that it's disappeared, but you've gotten more used to it because of sensory adaptation. When you jump in like a cold shower, feels crazy at first, you start to get used to it the longer you're in it. We know where our hands are in space because of something called proprioception. So proprioception is caused by proprioreceptors, which are stretch receptors in the muscles, tendons, and joints throughout your body. And basically, proprioception is your understanding of your body in space. And so I know my arm is extended out, even if my eyes were closed and I couldn't see that my arm was extended out. I know my arm is extended out right now because I have proprioceptors attached to all my muscles and tendons that are allowing my arm to be extended out. And I know my arm is brought back in because I have proprioceptors which tell me, yep, you've brought it back in. So they send information about the body's limb positions, which is cool. Um, and they can do that whether or not your eyes are open or whether or not you can see. This is why blind people can walk still, right? You don't need your eyes to walk or move your arms. The rest of that information is brought to you by proprioceptors. If you want to pause it here, there's just some interesting stuff on proprioception here, but regular exercise basically makes your proprioceptors more coordinated. So I'm not a very coordinated person. I also don't play sports. If you're an athletic individual and you play sports competitively or often, you likely have better coordination and body limb position sort of awareness. Those like me, which have 2 left feet, can't throw or catch to save my life, probably have poor proprioception. But you can, the good news is you can improve it through exercise. Taste receptors are found in your tongue, and they work much like all of these other senses have. They have a very specific chemical receptor inside of them, and those chemoreceptors send an action potential down to the neuron, and the neuron sends it to the part of the brain that is going to process it. There's 5 sort of agreed upon tastes: bitter, sour, salty, sweet, and then something called umami, which is basically that MSG monosodium glutamate taste. And it's kind of said that umami is a taste that triggers us to want more of what we're eating. We used to think that taste buds were only on the upper surface of the tongue, but we now know that taste buds are within the tongue as well, and they're not evenly distributed. There's no sections for it. So this image up here, I'll go back to it here, this isn't quite accurate because we actually have all of these different tastes, all of those chemical receptors are scattered throughout the entire tongue. Other animals have taste receptors as well, and they have them in different spots. Octopi have taste receptors on their tentacles. Crayfish have their taste receptors on their antennae. Insects have taste receptors on their legs. This is why when you see a fly or a bee land on something, they're constantly doing stuff with their legs and their arms, right? It's actually because that's how they sense their world. That's how they taste their world. One prediction theory as to why dinosaurs went extinct. This one's a little novel, but some people think that maybe dinosaurs went extinct because they couldn't taste bitterness of poisonous plants, and that's because they didn't have taste receptors. There's a little image I have to move my face over for you to appreciate. Okay. Smell. Humans can distinguish 10,000 different smells. Chemicals attached to these olfactory receptors in the nose, and just like always, a nerve impulse is traveled from the nose to the temporal lobe of the brain. The smell olfactory receptors are 3,000 times more sensitive than taste receptors. So what this means is the majority of what you consider to be tasty in terms of a meal is actually what you're smelling. This is why McDonald's never tastes as good when you are sick. Nothing tastes as good when you're sick because you can't smell, assuming your nose is plugged, you can't smell it. So if you can't smell it, you've got the majority of the appreciative qualities of that food omitted from your senses because your nose can't smell. And so your tongue is tasting something. It knows there's taste and you're familiar with it, but it's not as vivid. Okay, so when you're sick, like I said, olfactory receptors get blocked, and so since taste and smell work together, smell affects the taste of food. And we've already kind of talked about this. Here's a diagram, though, of the olfactory sensors behind the nose, and it'll send that information straight to the temporal lobe of the brain. And that, my friends, concludes our discussion of the senses. Thanks.